Hello, my beautiful stars. I'm Elias, your host today, and I'm a trans-feminine individual from the lands of Latvia who's also a Thelemic pagan, who's in the work of writing a book about agape and Thelema, my personal philosophy, and take on Thelema, but make it more decolonial, feminist, and more full of agape, which is why it's called the Grimoire of Agape. And I'm filming this in the midst of Aphrodisia, which was an ancient Greek festival held in the month of Hecatombion. I don't know how the hell to pronounce that, but it's basically the beginning of the Athenian New Year, which takes place roughly around after the summer solstice and the new moon that comes after it. And basically the festival was centered around purification, renewal, and civic harmony. This festival was held in honor of Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. Here's her altar because she's my patron deity, alongside with Lilith. That's her altar for reference. And I hope that brings us close to our today's topic, which is exploring feminine figures and goddesses throughout mythology, but make it with a twist through the lens of a radical feminist, which I definitely am, alongside with being an ancom, but we'll be emphasizing on the radical feminist part. Bear with me, this will be a multi-part series. No matter how lengthy this video already is, this video is only dedicated to the Greco-Roman deities and figures. So let's dive into it. Throughout early human history, divine power was frequently represented in feminine or gender fluid forms. In prehistoric and early agrarian societies, goddesses occupied central roles in religious practice, embodying not only fertility and nurturing, but also sovereignty, warfare, and death. These deities represented complex, multifaceted expressions of power unrestricted by later patriarchal definitions of femininity. The development of patriarchal societies, particularly through political consolidation, institutionalized monotheism and patrilineal inheritance systems, systematically constrained representations of female divinity. This transition coincided with increasing control over women's sexuality and bodily autonomy. Goddesses symbolizing autonomy, erotic power, or righteous rage were reinterpreted as dangerous or irrelevant, while others were reduced to passive archetypes such as the virgin or the nurturing mother. This process actively reinforced patriarchal norms. Mythology functioned as a vehicle for cultural values, legitimizing social hierarchies through narrative reconstruction. Consequently, figures like Medusa, Lilith, and Circe, originally embodiments of feminine agency, were transformed into cautionary tales. Reclaiming these mythological figures constitutes a feminist act of cultural recovery. These narratives provide alternative frameworks for conceptualizing feminine power, frameworks centered on complexity, autonomy, and resistance to male-centered roles. The series examines goddesses and mythic figures ranging from Greco-Roman, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, to Baltic and contemporary traditions, and many more, to analyze patriarchal mythological development and feminist reclamation strategies. So yeah, let's start with the Greco-Roman world. And who else would we choose to start with rather than my patron deity and the goddess who is honored in the festival of Aphrodisia, named none other than Aphrodite, or Venus to the Romans. Yeah, she is one of the most recognizable figures in classical mythology. She is the goddess of love, beauty, sexuality, and desire, but the full story of Aphrodite is far more complex than the romanticized, often eroticized image passed down to us. She is not simply the goddess of attraction, she is a figure of profound, unruly power, and in both ancient and modern contexts, she reveals the radical political dimensions of beauty, desire, and female sovereignty. Aphrodite's cult demonstrates syncretic evolution from Near Eastern precursors, notably Inanna, Sumerian, and Ishtar, Babylonian deities associated with sexuality, warfare, and kingship. Transmission via Cypriot and Levantine trade routes reflects Mediterranean cultural exchange and colonial dynamics. Hesiod's Theogony positions Aphrodite's birth from Cephalon following Uranus's castration, establishing her as a primordial force independent of Olympian patriarchal structures, and Homer's alternate genealogy naming her Zeus's daughter suggests later attempts to subordinate her authority within the divine hierarchy. She appears in many foundational myths. Aphrodite instigates the Trojan War by awarding the golden apple to Paris in exchange for Helen, the most beautiful woman, a story used to portray her as a frivolous or manipulative, but which actually reveals the weaponization of beauty and female bodies in patriarchal politics. In the Hippolytus of Euripides, she punishes a young man who rejects her domain of erotic desire highlighting the dangers of repressing sexuality, particularly female sexuality, in a society that idealizes purity. Her love affair with Ares, the god of war, is often framed as a scandal, but can also be interpreted as a metaphor for the union of desire and destruction in human nature. She is also associated with queer desire and gender transformation. In some versions of myth, she is the mother of Hermaphroditus, a figure of dual gender embodiment. This myth in particular is where we get the often used derogatory word for a person who has both male and female sexual characteristics like me, and other words for kind of being intersex, hermaphroditism. She's also involved in the myth of Pygmalion, which critiques male fantasy and the objectification of women. In the ancient world, Aphrodite was not simply the goddess of romantic love. She was worshipped as a force of fertility, maritime power, and political alliance. Her most important cult sites were in Cyprus, Paphos to be exact, and Cythera and Corinth, cities known for trade, migration, and cultural hybridity. In some locations, she was venerated as Pt.1, the goddess of all the people, associated with communal unity and social cohesion. Rituals included offerings of incense, doves, flowers, and in some cases erotic dances or symbols of genitalia. Scholars have debated the historical accuracy of sacred prostitution, often cited in connection with her worship, but contemporary feminist historians emphasize that sexuality in her cults was not sinful or shameful, it was sacred. Her Roman counterpart, Venus, was transformed into a symbol of imperial power until under Julius Caesar and Augustus, who claimed descent from her through, how do I pronounce this word? Aeneas. The love itself was conscripted into an empire. A shift with lasting consequences. Aphrodite bore many epithets. Aphrodite Urania, denoting spiritual love. Aphrodite Pandemos, of all the people. And Urania being heavenly. And Pandemos linked to the physical or communal desire. Philomedes, or often mixed up with Philomedes, laughter loving, and the latter being genital loving, highlighting both joy and eroticism. Also, Aphrodite Aurea, highlighting her warlike nature, and also just referencing her little affair with Ares, and these epithets point out to her broad range. She's sacred and sexual, celestial and earthly, divine and dangerously human. Her archetype is not the woman in love, it is the woman who knows she is desirable and makes that power her own. Aphrodite is often dismissed as superficial, but her feminist power lies in how she reclaims desire, especially female and queer desire, as creative, sovereign, and divine. She challenges the patriarchal control of women's bodies and sexuality by embodying femininity that's unapologetic, active, and expansive. She refuses shame. She knows her own beauty, and she uses it as a weapon and gift. Modern feminists, especially those engaged in goddess spirituality, have proclaimed Aphrodite as a symbol of bodily autonomy, sex positivity, queer fluidity, and creative self-love. In queer traditions, Aphrodite has been embraced as a patron of eroticism beyond the binary, as a deity of gender play, same-sex love, and non-normative embodiment. While ancient texts don't explicitly label her as a patron of lesbians in modern terms, she's closely tied to Sappho of Lesbos, the renowned lyric poet who wrote passionate love poems to women and frequently invoked Aphrodite as her divine muse and ally. In this way, Aphrodite becomes symbolically aligned with lesbian love and desire, not just through Sappho, but through her broader representation as a goddess who honors erotic expression outside patriarchal norms. Modern queer and feminist spiritualities who embrace her as a patroness of queer femmes, lesbians, and who reclaim erotic power. In modern culture, Aphrodite has been reimagined in diverse ways, as a sex object in popular media, for example in Xena and Percy Jackson, which often flattens her complexity, as a political icon in feminist art, for example, Judy's Chicago's The Dinner Party, and in queer theory, as a figure of empowerment in body positive movements, especially among trans, fat, and BIPOC feminists reclaiming beauty on their own terms. She has also inspired feminists in queer retellings, such as Madeline Miller's Galatea, a story that critiques male control over female bodies in creation. Aphrodite's Mediterranean Near Eastern roots have often been whitened in Western art and literature, rendering her as a pale-skinned ideal of classical beauty. This definitely erases her likely brown, Levantine heritage of the syncretic colonial histories of her worship. In this sense, she is a symbol of how beauty has been colonialized and weaponized, and how feminist and decolonial movements can reclaim it. Furthermore, Aphrodite's association with prostitution and sex work, both vilified and idealized in history, often open crucial conversations around class, consent, and the sacredness of sex labor. For some, she becomes a patron of liberation through pleasure, for others a symbol of coercion under capitalism. Both interpretations have value, but also tension. Aphrodite is not a perfect feminist icon for some, but her well-kept myth often centered on competition between women or portray her as manipulative or vain. These portrayals reflect patriarchal. Can I speak normally? These portrayals reflect patriarchal anxieties about women who desire, who are powerful, who cannot be contained. Rather than reject her, feminist thinkers ask us to read between the lines and recover what's been buried. Why do you think it was that beneficial for writers of the ancient times to villainize feminine desire and power? Well, Aphrodite teaches us that desire is not weakness, that beauty can be a side of power, not oppression, that pleasure is political, and that femininity in all its forms can be expansive, disruptive, sacred, and to reclaim Aphrodite is not to idealize her, but to engage her critically as a figure who invites us to rethink what it means to be powerful in a world that tells us to be small. Yep. So next we'll be looking at Artemis, or Diana. When we think of Artemis or her Roman counterpart Diana, we often picture the wild huntress, bow drawn, deer by her side, but behind this image is a far older and far more complex goddess, one whose story tells us much more about how ancient femininity was both revered and regulated, and how modern feminists had reclaimed the divine as a site of resistance. Artemis first appears in the mythological record in the Iliad by Homer and Theogony by Hesiod, but her origins likely predate these texts. Archaeological evidence links her to the earlier mother and nature goddesses from the Bronze Age, Aegean and Anatolia, and she was worshipped across the Greek world, with major cult centers in Ephesus, Bauron, and Delos, the island where she and her twin brother Apollo were said to be born to Leto, a wandering mother denied shelter by the gods. Artemis was not merely a goddess of hunts, she was a protector of wild animals and young girls, a guardian of childbirth, and a punisher of male trespassers. Next, she turns Actaeon into a stag for violating her privacy and transforms Callisto into a bear after Callisto is raped by Zeus. A story that highlights the complex and often harsh regulations of the victims of sexual assault themselves under patriarchy, not the actual perpetrator. What makes Artemis especially significant to feminist analysis is her autonomy. She famously asked Zeus to grant her eternal virginity, not as a symbol of moral purity in the Christian sense, but as a declaration of freedom from marriage, childbearing, and male control. She lives in the wilderness outside of the domestic and civic spaces women were traditionally confined to, her relationships with nymphs, animals, and the moon, not with men. Her Roman form, Diana, retained many of these qualities and became a symbol of independence and chastity. Under Roman rule, Diana was associated with common people, and her temple at Lake Nemi, where she was worshipped as Diana Nemorensis, was a rare site of religious authority led by a priest known as Rex Nemorensis, who could only take power by defeating his predecessor in combat. Some feminist scholars interpret this as a matrifocal survival myth, where divine feminine power must be fought for but never truly extinguished. In modern culture, Artemis has been revived as a symbol of feminine self-possession and queer identity. From Wonder Woman's sacred homeland of Themyscira, inspired by Amazonian myths, to neo-pagan and Wiccan traditions where Diana is worshipped as a moon goddess, the figure of Artemis persists as an archetype of the resistance, who is wild, untamed, and unclaimed. Yet her story is not without complexity. Her protection of virginity is often read through patriarchal lenses that stigmatize sexuality. Her vengeance can be seen as violent or even unforgiving, but these tensions are part of what makes her powerful. She is not designed to be palatable. She exists on her own terms, and which is precisely what makes her relevant today. In reclaiming Artemis, we are not returning to a lost golden age. We are excavating a deeper lineage of feminine power that refuses to be reduced. She invites us to rethink what freedom, embodiment, and boundaries can mean for women and gender non-conforming people today. She reminds us that to stand alone is not to be alone, it is to be sovereign. Athena, known to the Romans as Minerva, is one of the most paradoxical figures in classical mythology. A goddess of war born without a mother, who champions civilization, wisdom, and strategic power, yet is often positioned in opposition to traditionally feminine domains. This contradiction makes her an especially rich subject in feminist discourse, embodying both the triumphs and the tensions of female power within patriarchal systems. Athena first appears in the Iliad and Odyssey by Homer, where she serves as a divine counselor to male heroes such as Odysseus and Achilles. Her birth story is among the most famous. She springs fully armed from the head of Zeus after he swallows her pregnant mother. Metis, the goddess of wisdom. This myth has often been read as a symbolic erasure of matrilineal power. Zeus literally absorbs female intellect, appropriates the birth process. In ancient Greece, Athena was a patroness of the city-state, especially Athens, where the Parthenon was dedicated to her. She was worshipped as a goddess of craft, law, and strategy, never chaos, passion, or brute strength. Her martial aspect was discipline and intellection, contrasted with Odysseus' rage-driven violence. She represented warfare as a civic duty, not as personal ambition. Athena's symbols, the owl, olive tree, aegis, and helmet, reflect her associations with intelligence, protection, and urban life. Her epithets include Pallas, meaning maiden, or wielder of weapons, and Promachos, champion. Despite being a warrior, she remains a virgin, a state interpreted by some feminists as autonomy, not repression. Yet Athena's virginity and allegiance to male heroes and patriarchal order have led to critical debates. In the Orestia by Aeschylus, she side with the Orestes, who murdered his mother Clytemnestra. I'm sorry for the pronunciations, guys, arguing that the father's role is more important than the mother's in reproduction. This legal ruling in the mythic content symbolizes the transition from matriarchal blood vengeance to patriarchal civic justice. Feminist scholars have critiqued this moment as a foundational myth for women's political disempowerment. Still, Athena's complexity offers power. She's one of the few female figures in Greek myth to move freely in public space, to command armies, to work with enemies, and to resist objectification. Her intelligence is not passive. It builds cities, shapes law, and protects heroes. Her alliance with strategy over emotion, intellect, or seduction makes her a symbol of female authority within male-dominated structures. Modern feminism has approached Athena in multiple ways. She has been critiqued as a patriarchal daughter, which means a woman who achieves power by upholding male systems, yet also reclaimed as a model of female excellence, professionalism, and autonomy, especially for women navigating leadership in patriarchal institutions. In popular culture, Athena appears in literature, graphic novels, and even video games as an emblem of female intelligence and defiance. Athena's story raises complex questions about assimilation, autonomy, and survival. Can a woman gain power within patriarchal frameworks within being co-opted by them? Does refusing femininity reinforce misogyny, or does it subvert expected gender roles? Her Roman counterpart, Minerva, was more closely linked with artisans, teachers, and intellectuals, especially under Augustus, when Roman culture emphasized law and civic order. In some interpretations, she became more domesticated, less a warrior, and more a symbol of cultivated female reason. Athena, Minerva, continues to inspire feminist theorists, activists, and artists who seek to balance intellect, power, and integrity. Her myth challenges to confront and the costs of possibilities of strategic conformity, and invites us to redefine strength not through violence or dominance, but through vision, discipline, and refusal. Hera, or Juno, as she was known to the Romans, is one of the most misunderstood and maligned goddesses in the Greco-Roman pantheon. Often portrayed as jealous, vengeful, and obsessed with her unfaithful husband Zeus, Hera has become a cultural shorthand for a better wife. But this image obscures her much older origins as a powerful deity in her own right, one who embodies sovereignty, queenship, and the complexities of feminine power within a patriarchal framework. Hera's worship predates the Homeric epics, and likely has roots in pre-Greek, possibly Minoan or Mycenaean cults. She was venerated in major sanctuaries such as Argos, Samos, and Olympia, where she had her own temples and festivals like the Heraia, similar to ones that I mentioned previously, Aphrodisia for Aphrodite, and Heraia was a women's athletic event held in her honor. This indicates that Hera was not simply defined by her marriage to Zeus, but functioned as a central deity in her own cultic traditions. In mythology, Hera is the queen of the gods, goddess of marriage, sovereignty, and the protector of women, especially in childbirth and legal unions. Her myths, however, were heavily shaped by patriarchal narrative filters. On Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, she appears as both a cunning strategist and a combative wife. Her rage often stems from Zeus's infidelity, and she's shown punishing his lovers and their children, such as Leto, Semele, and Heracles. Feminist interpretations urge us to read these stories not as evidence of Hera's irrationality, but as expressions of female power being reduced to the emotional reaction within male-centered storytelling. Hera's anger is not only jealousy, it is protest, her refusal to accept the patriarchal erasure of female authority, sexual boundaries. She's one of few goddesses who challenges Zeus directly, and politically, often allying with other gods to influence cosmic decisions. Hera's Roman counterpart, Juno, was more overtly associated with state power. She was part of the Capitoline Triad with Jupiter and Minerva, and held titles such as Juno Regina, Queen, and Juno Moneta, Advisor, Warner, which is where the Latin word for coin stems from. Also, Latvian was all called them monetas, and which also reflect her civic and protective roles. Juno was also revered as Juno Lucina, the goddess who brings children into light, emphasizing her function as a life giver and a guardian of women's reproductive sovereignty. The symbolism of Hera, Juno, is rich with feminist resonance. Her peacock, not the cock you pee with, the bird, an ancient emblem of renewal and beauty. Her diadem and her throne all speak to majesty, vision, and authority. Despite being paired with Zeus, she is not subordinate in origin. She is his equal in divine rank. Some scholars argue that Hera may once have been an independent mother goddess whose identity was later subsumed into the patriarchal Olympian structure. In modern feminist spirituality, Hera is often reevaluated, not ovulated, as a figure of dignity, resilience, and rage. She represents the experience of being powerful, is constrained, a woman whose legitimacy is constantly challenged, yet who refuses to relinquish her voice. Her jealousy becomes in this lens a mirror for the way patriarchal cultures weaponize emotional expression in women to undermine their agency. Contemporary representations of Hera still struggle with ambivalence. In popular media, she is sometimes villainized, as in Hercules 1997, or marginalized, yet feminist authors and artists have been portraying her as a goddess of female alliances, political wisdom, and ritual strength. She becomes especially meaningful for discussions around marriage as contest a space for ownership and empowerment, as well for anyone navigating the difficult terrain of maintaining power within institutionalized roles. What was that? Nothing with authors, so everything's alright. Critically, Hera also brings to light how female rage is often misread or delegitimized, and how feminine authority is rewritten through the lens of male narratives. Her role as a queen, bound by political union yet unwilling to be silenced, resonates with ongoing struggles over the representation of women in leadership, particularly women of color, queer women, and those whose authority is perceived as threatening. In reclaiming Hera, we recognize that feminine power is not always gentle, nurturing, or soft. It can be fierce, strategic, and enraged, not as pathology, but as protest. Hera asks us, what does it mean to be powerful in a world that continually berates your power as dysfunction? Now let's move on to Demeter. Demeter, also known as Ceres, goddess of agriculture, grain, and the fertility of the earth, is often remembered as a grieving mother in the myth of Persephone. But her role in the Greco-Roman pantheon reaches far beyond Sappho. She is a sovereign deity, a sustainer of life, and a deeply complex figure through whom we can explore motherhood, power, and resistance to patriarchal control over women's bodies and cycles. Demeter's name is derived from Gemeter, meaning Earth Mother. Her cult predates classical Greece and likely descends from pre-Indo-European agrarian goddesses of the Near East and Aegean regions. In Greek religion, she was worshipped from early as the Mycenaean period, with major sanctuaries in Eleusis, Arcadia, and Sicily. Her worship was intimately tied to the seasons, sowing harvest and the rhythms of life and death. The most well-known myth involving Demeter is the abduction of Persephone, also called Kore, the maiden in Roman mythology, by Hades, the god of the underworld, as told in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. Hades kidnaps Persephone with the silent consent of Zeus. Surely. Yeah, the consent was from Zeus to abduct. Anyways, Demeter, enraged and devastated, searches for her daughter. In protest, she withholds fertility from the earth, causing a global famine. Only when Persephone is partially restored to her spending part of the year above and part below, does the earth bloom again, giving rise to the cycle of seasons. This myth is one of the most feminist in the classical canon and centers on a mother refusing to accept the patriarchal seizure of her daughter and her power to shut down the entire life-sustaining order in response. It is not Zeus or Hades who controls fertility. It is Demeter. Her protest is not passive or mourning. It is an act of cosmic resistance. The Eleusinian mysteries, among the most important religious rites in ancient Greece, were centered on Demeter and Persephone. These secretive initiatory rites rituals promised spiritual rebirth and some form of afterlife for their initiates. Notably, they were open to women, slaves, and foreigners, and unusual egalitarian elements in heavily stratified society. Through these rites, Demeter was not just a grieving mother, but a divine teacher and guide through cycles of death and renewal. Demeter's symbols, wheat, poppies, torches, and the cornucopia, reflect her dual nature as a life giver and a mourner. Her torch-bearing image is in many statues and vases, paintings, represent her tireless search and fierce determination. Feminist interpretations often see Demeter as a symbol of maternal power, but not as a domesticated or sentimental sense. She demands respect, punishes injustice, and asserts the sanctity of female bonds. Her story challenges the patriarchal treatment of women as property. Persephone is not given the marriage, she is taken, and Demeter's wrath reshapes the cosmos in response. In modern feminist spirituality, Demeter is honored as an archetype of mothering that includes anger, grief, and transformation. She is invoked in rituals about reproductive justice, grief, work, climate change, and ancestral remembrance. In contemporary psychological interpretations, such as those by Jean Shinoda Bolen, she represents the mother archetype in its nurturing and protective, but also fiercely independent dimensions. Demeter's story has also been reinterpreted in post-colonial intersectional feminist contexts. Some scholars argue that Persephone's abduction mirrors the histories of colonization, enslavement, and forced separation of families, while Demeter's resistance becomes a metaphor for survival, memory, and land sovereignty. In this reading, Demeter's grief becomes an archetype of ancestral trauma, but also defiant love. Potential critiques arise in the romanticization of motherhood or in interpretations that reduce Demeter solely to a maternal figure. Yet her myth does not present motherhood as passive or apolitical. On the contrary, Demeter mobilizes motherhood as a site of resistance, agency, and sacred obligation. In reclaiming Demeter, we are invited to view grief as a form of protest, maternal power, political, and fertility as not a compliance with patriarchal reproduction, but also a force rooted in the earth and choice, and in sacred reciprocity. She reminds us that caring for the world means refusing to let it be taken. Guess who we're moving on to? Hecate. Hecate is one of the most enigmatic and enduring goddesses of the Greco-Roman world. Known as the goddess of magic, crossroads, liminality, and the underworld, she occupies a unique place in ancient religion, not bound by the Olympus, but not entirely Chthonic either. Her presence stretches far across time, cultures, and spiritual tradition, making her a powerful symbol for those exploring feminist, queer, and anti-authoritarian identities. Hecate's origins may predate classical Greece. She is believed to have Anatolian or Thracian roots, and earlier references to her appear in pre-Homeric and Hesiodic texts. In Theogony, Hesiod describes her as a goddess honored above all by Zeus, possessing dominion over land, sea, and sky. Unlike many other goddesses, Hecate retained her independent power under the Olympian rule. She was not subordinated or confined to a narrowly defined role. In Greek and Roman culture, she was venerated as city gates, thresholds, and liminal spaces. Also, let's not forget crossroads. Her most prominent cult centers were in Caria, Thessaly, and later Rome. She was invoked during rites of protection, necromancy, childbirth, and political transitions. All areas where boundary crossing and transformation were at play. Although not a central character in many myths, Hecate plays an important role in the Demeter-Persephone myth, where she hears Persephone's cries during the abduction and later guides Demeter through the darkness. She becomes a torch-bearing companion to Persephone, sometimes viewed as a guide between worlds, a psychopomp, and the guardian of the liminal. Hecate's epithets reflect her multifaceted nature: Cleidohos, key-bearer, Phosphoros, light-bringer, Propylia. Holy shit, I'm so bad at pronouncing this shit. Holy shit.
My laptop is dying. I hope the same isn't happening as my previous laptop. This one is used, but it's not new to me. And now it's like literally not working without the charger plug in. And now it's showing me colors. The RGB scale. This glass. Green, black, red, white, black, green, blue, white, black. Holy shit. Please work for the sake of fuck. This is a great time to talk about my song, Hecate. It was my first single, and it was kind of devoted to her, but also using her as a symbol of like that time of my life when I wandered into the occult, explored my spirituality, wandered into witchcraft, magic. That time was actually when I was healing the most. I was healing the most. I was empowered. I was crossing the paths between a place where, yeah, religion had really fucked me over. But then I was like, I had explored paganism. Then I went into paganism and everything changed forever. I was devoted to Hecate for a long time. Not really a long time. But later I realized our paths have not crossed. It went like this. And like it was far up from what I wanted to achieve by my work. And so, yeah, I hope my PC has restored itself again. And, yeah, bitch, I wasn't even supposed to talk about this, but like my PC is rebelling against this shit. And so I have to fill in the space because I cannot stop or else my language will disappear again. Props to me being a Latvian who's fluent in English, but my pronunciation is very tiring to process in my brain. I read, I type, I do everything very well in English, but like speaking, especially speaking while reading, that's kind of help.
It's restored. So let's return to Hecate. There's some spooky shit happening here. Oh, it's just Aphrodite's candle. Hold on. Nothing special. The candle was just dripping onto the floor like usual. The one which is the most closest to the wall. And the goddess is dripping on the floor. What else can we do? I'll clean that up later. And probably she's just telling me to fucking replace that cloth. I have a new one, and I haven't replaced it in ages. Oopsie. Okay, so Hecate. Let's just start with the epithets. I don't know if I did pronounce them like Hecate's. Epithets reflect her multifaceted nature. Cleidohos, Prosperous, Propylia of the gates, and Catania of the underworld. These titles show her as a protector, intermediary, and a sovereign of boundaries, both literal and metaphorical. Hecate's feminist relevance lies in the refusal to be confined. She's neither virgin nor mother in the traditional patriarchal sense. She exists outside of the dichotomies assigned to women. She is powerful, feared, and revered, not for her beauty or utility to male gods, but for her autonomous authority. She embodies female agency that is unafraid of the dark, of change, of the unseen. Her feminist spirituality and Wiccan traditions, Hecate has been reclaimed as a triple goddess, representing maiden, mother, and crone. A post-classical interpretation that underscores the cyclical, evolving nature of womanhood. She also appears in queer feminist circles as a protector of outsiders, witches, and non-conforming identities. Her symbols include sarjas, keys, serpents, dogs, and the moon, especially the waning or dark moon. As an archetype, she represents the witch, the liminal guide, and the wise woman, the crone, and the sovereign outsider. She speaks to those excluded from power, yet capable of transforming the world through knowledge, ritual, and connection to mystery. Hecate's resurgence in modern culture, from feminist literature to occult subcultures, reflects her ongoing relevance. She's the figure invoked in anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchal, and eco-spiritual movements, where she represents the wisdom of the margins, the sanctity of the shadow, and the possibility of radical transformation. Witchcraft and magic, domains Hecate rules, have become spaces for queer and feminist resistance, especially among those reclaiming ancestral practices, diasporic identities, and femme power. Scholars such as Margaret Murray and Starhawk have argued for Hecate's importance in contemporary goddess movements, where her attributes symbolize resilience, intuition, and nonconformity. Some critiques caution against homogenizing Hecate into the modern triple goddess mold, which may oversimplify her diverse historical roles. Others note the potential appropriation of ancient traditions by predominantly white Western feminist groups, urging us to contextualize Hecate's worship across cultures and histories of power. Still, Hecate remains a potent figure for anyone grappling with transformation, liminality, and defiance of gendered norms. She's not a goddess of comfort, but of courage. The courage to walk into the dark, light your torch, and stand at the crossroads on your own terms.
I don't suggest stream Hecate though. Like my song, I mean. It's pretty shit. Well, alright, let's move on to
Nyx. Nyx, the primordial goddess of the night, represents one of the most ancient and elemental forces in the Greek cosmology. Far from being a secondary figure, Nyx is older than the Olympians and was feared even by Zeus himself. Her presence reflects an enduring feminine power that predates and resists patriarchal order, making her a powerful symbol for feminist and anti-authoritarian inquiry. Okay, Nyx meaning night originates in the earliest Greek cosmogonies, especially in the Orphic and Hesiodic tradition. She's one of the primordial deities, both directly from chaos, the void from which all things emerged, but also, according to Hesiod's theogony, Nyx gave birth also to a vast range of conceptual deities, including Hypnos, sleep, Thanatos, death, Moros, doom, Nemesis, retribution, and Ares, strife. Figures that represent the uncontrollable or liminal forces in human life. Her origins are pre-Olympian, and she was venerated indirectly through mystery cults and Chthonic rites, rather than to temple-based worship like the Olympian gods. Her domain was not public piety, but mystery and unconscious power. Nyx does not feature prominently in narrative myth, but her mythological significance is profound. In the theogony, even Zeus is said to fear her, remarkable detail considering that few, if any, gods could threaten him. This fear signifies Nyx's autonomous authority and her connection to death, prophecy, and fate, which even the patriarchal structures of the Olympian order cannot control. She resides at the edge of the world, near Tartarus, and is depicted as emerging each night with her dark veil, followed by her daughter Hemera, symbolizing the eternal cyclical nature of darkness and light, not as opposites, but as interdependent forces. Nyx's epithets are rare, but her archetypal roles are clear. She is the Dark Mother, the Matrix of Night, and the Womb of Mystery. She governs what cannot be seen, what cannot be controlled, the unconscious, the dream realm, and the truth that lies beneath appearances. These associations outline her with feminine archetypes of shadow, intuition, ancestral knowledge, often suppressed in patriarchal epistemologies. Nyx's feminist significance lies in her primordial authority, creative power, and interdependence from male deities. She's neither wife nor daughter of a more powerful god. Her generative capacity is self-contained. She creates without subordination, and her domain is vast, noble, and essential. She embodies a form of feminine power that does not rely on beauty, domesticity, or relationality, often the only available tropes for women in patriarchal myths. Modern feminist thinkers draw on Nyx as a symbol of the unknown, the marginal, the feared aspects of femininity, often labeled monstrous or dangerous because they resist assimilation. She is a reminder that not all power is visible, not all knowledge is rational, and Nyx has been embraced in goddess spirituality, feminist witchcraft, and occult traditions as a representation of the divine feminine in its most mysterious and powerful form. She is featured in tarot decks, moon rituals, and dark moon invocations, in literature and pop culture. Nyx often appears as a figure of ambiguous morality, reinforcing her liminal and transgressive character. Example in the House of Nine series or various video games and comics. Her symbolism resonates particularly in particularly in feminist psychoanalysis and spiritual practice, representing the depths of the self, the collective unconscious, and the relation as darkness is sacred rather than shameful, very similar to Lilith. Though Nyx is not directly tied to themes of race, sexuality, or class in ancient texts, her association with darkness has been racialized in modern Western thought, where darkness is often coded negatively. A decolonial feminist reading might interrogate how whiteness has historically weaponized metaphors of night, chaos, and the unknown, and how reclaiming Nyx might serve as a spiritual resistance to colonial binaries of light, dark, good, evil, rational, irrational. Moreover, Nyx's absence from centralized, patriarchally controlled temples can read as a form of the resistance to institutional religion. Her power lies in the periphery, the unseen, the occult, the esoteric, the sacred, feminine, than the patriarchal systems that fail to assimilate. That's feared. Next offers us a lens to understand the powers of what is hidden, the necessity of uncertainty, and the creative potency of liminality. She affirms that the feminine strength does not always present itself in clarity, light, or control, but often in mystery, depth, or transformation. For a feminist thinker, she is a reminder that resistance can be quiet, cyclical, and rooted in ancestral silence. In reclaiming Nyx, we reclaim that not as a space for fear, but as a site of possibility, a realm where marginalized knowledges and identities can find sanctuary, where feminine power can move freely without containment. Who else can we talk about if not the mother of Nyx, or the parent? Chaos's nature and gender is very debated. But in Hesiod's theogony, chaos is the first principle of existence, described not as a disorder, but as a primordial void or gaping space from which all things arise. Chaos precedes Gaia, Earth, Tartarus, the abyss, and Eros, desire. Importantly, chaos is not gendered in most ancient texts. Later traditions often interpreted or presumed chaos in varied ways. Sometimes it's feminine, sometimes it's androgynous, and often formless. Unlike the anthropomorphic Olympians, chaos is more of the cosmogonic concept than a deity with temples or cults. In early Greek cosmology, chaos is not evil or destructive, but the womb of potentiality, space before division, structure, and patriarchal order. Later philosophical and scientific systems, such as those of Plato or Aristotle, I respect them. But they sought to define the cosmos as ordered and rational, gradually devaluing chaos and associating it with fear, disorder, and feminine unconscious. Symbolic shift that paralleled the development of patriarchal rationalism and subjugation of women, nature, and the body. From a feminist perspective, chaos can be reclaimed as the primordial womb, a metaphor for the contained, unknowable, and the creative aspects of existence that patriarchal systems often attempt to suppress or control. In this reading, chaos resists boundaries. It is neither good or evil, neither male or female, but as a space of non-dual possibility. Chaos becomes an apt symbol for feminist spirituality that challenges rigid binaries and hierarchy, intersectional feminism, which embraces fluidity, contradiction, and multiplicity, and resistance to epistemic patriarchy, the domination of knowledge systems that value order, clarity, and control of the lived experience and liminality. Chaos thus resonates with Black feminist thought, for example, Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic, and queer theory, for example, Judith Butler's performativity by celebrating the unruly and unclassifiable. Chaos and feminist neo-paganism and esotericism is sometimes reframed as a dark goddess or great womb, the formless source of becoming. Artists, writers, and theorists have used chaos to explore themes of post-colonial disorder, trauma, and transformation, not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. Chaos doesn't have a standard symbol like other deities, but is often represented as the yawning void, spirals representing motion without a fixed center, the womb, the night, or oceanic abyss. Archetypally, chaos aligns with the dark feminine, the crone, the great mother, or even, in some cases, the rebel trickster. Depending on the cultural lens, some feminists may argue that chaos is a formless concept-less narrative grounding compared to embodied goddesses like Artemis or Aphrodite. Its association with destruction and madness has historically been weaponized against women and femmes. However, this highlights its values. To reclaim chaos is to reclaim what patriarchal systems fear: unregulated becoming, power without domination. Chaos invites us to rethink what the value of uncertainty, transition, and uncontainability, qualities often feminized and pathologized. Why can't I speak? In feminist activism, embracing chaos can mean accepting messiness, radical reimagination, and dismantling oppressive systems. Chaos offers inspiration for feminists resisting rigid gender categories, queer communities celebrating fluid identity, activists navigating uncertainty and clubs with creative vision, and in reclaiming chaos, feminists can affirm complexity over clarity, embrace the liminal and non-linear and the unknown, challenge systems that fear the unruly, the emotional, or the formless. Thank you. Next, we have Gaia, and she is the daughter of chaos. Gaia, in ancient cosmology, is one of the primordial deities emerging directly after or even simultaneously in some stories with chaos and Hesiod's theogony. She represents the earth itself, and generative, a divine being who bears sky, Uranus, sea, Pontus, mountains, and a multitude of gods and titans and monsters without male participation. As Hesiod writes, "Verily, as the first chaos came to be, next came what blossomed, Gaia, the ever-sure foundation of all." Gaia is not merely symbolic of the earth, she is earth, conscious, creative, and sovereign. She stands at the foundation of existence and is central to Greek theogony and cosmogony. Theogony and cosmogony. How do you pronounce that? Oh my god, have I been reading theogony wrong? And cosmogony, it doesn't sound right. Or is that just me being Latvian? Okay, Gaia was worshipped in early Chthonic, earth-based cults, often associated with oracles and burial rites. She had early shrines in Delphi before Apollo supplanted her, and was invoked as the deep womb of nature, life-giver, and prophetess. Although her active worship declined in favor of Olympic deities like Demeter and Artemis, Gaia remains symbolically significant, and her sacred symbols include the earth itself, snakes, often Chthonic guardians, food, cornucopia, and maternal imagery. Gaia was also connected to justice and cosmic order, not as a lawgiver like Zeus, but as a moral and ecological balance. Gaia's most central myths emphasize parthenogenesis, birthing without male seed, and resistance to male domination. She births Uranus, who becomes her consort, but when he suppresses their children, the Titans, she orchestrates his castration through Kronos, giving birth to Aphrodite and someone else. Yeah, you'll hear that later. Later, when Kronos is overthrown by Zeus, she births Typhon, a monstrous challenger to Zeus, representing resistance to patriarchal succession. Gaia thus appears repeatedly as a force opposing sky gods' authoritarian rule and defending degenerative embodied power. Gaia's mythology offers a pre-patriarchal model of feminine power, creative, autonomous, and foundational. She represents sovereign motherhood, producing life without subjugation, resistance to male usurpation and patriarchal lineage, and ecological justice, an early symbol of environmental consciousness tied to feminist earth-based spirituality. In feminist theory and ecofeminism, Gaia becomes emblematic of the connection between the oppression of women and nature, their evaluation of embodied maternal cyclic knowledge over abstract rationalism, and Carolyn Merchant in The Death of Nature in 1980 writes about the symbolic shift from Earth as a nurturing mother to inert matter under patriarchy, chain mirrored in Gaia's decline in Greek religion. In Roman mythology, Gaia becomes Terra Mater, similar Earth deity. In Gnostic traditions, Sophia, aka wisdom, is sometimes associated with Gaia as the fallen embodiment of divine feminine matter. The modern Gaia hypothesis, presented by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, reframes Gaia scientifically as Earth functioning as a self-regulating organism. Just like the self-cleansing vagina! This model has been embraced by ecofeminists and spiritual feminists alike. Gaia is a central figure in modern feminist neo-paganism, Wicca, and goddess spirituality as a symbol of Earth's sacredness. You may ask me, as a Wicca hater, why am I mentioning Wicca so much? Because it emphasizes the goddess. And there's like so many Dianic cults within Wicca, so you cannot not mention it without looking at, when you're looking at modern reinterpretations of the divine feminine, especially in Western esotericism. And so, in climate activism, Gaia represents ecological consciousness and planetary care, especially in intersectional feminist movements that link environmental destruction to gendered and racial oppression. Her name appears in movements such as the Gaia Foundation, who love it, Gaianism, a nature-reverent spiritual philosophy, and literary works to connect motherhood, nature, and power. For example, works of Starhawk or Maria Gimbutas. Shout out to the Lithuanians, brother Lithuanians, or more so should I say sisters Lithuanians. We'll have a Baltic series. We'll have it. It will be short, but Baltic goddesses won't be forgotten. While Gaia is often romanticized, some scholars critique the essentializing of women as earth or nature, which can reinforce biological determinism, the binary opposition of nature, woman versus culture, man. However, others argue that reclaiming Gaia as a counter-hegemonic outset values what has been devalued and distorted. Gaia teaches that feminine power is foundational and peripheral. Creation, nurture, and resistance can coexist, and there's value in reclaiming embodiment, ecology, and interdependence as political and spiritual truths. Her story invites feminists to reconnect with the earth as a living presence, not passively maternal, but active, wild, and just. Gaia's presence reminds us that care and resistance are not opposites, but twins. And I definitely mentioned somebody who else was made out of that castration. Arrhenius, Known in Roman mythology as the Furies, they're ancient, chthonic deities of vengeance and moral retribution. Their name is something euphemistically replaced with Eumenides, the kindly ones to appease their wrath. According to Hesiod's Theogony, they were born of the blood of Uranus, spilled upon Gaia when he was castrated by Kronos, linking their origin directly to an act of cosmic patriarchal violence. So, although Aphrodite is always seen as the one who was born of the testes, also the Furies were the ones to be born of the blood of the testes. Unlike Olympian gods, the Erinyes are primordial beings who represent moral order, blood justice, and the rage of the wrong, particularly when oaths are broken. Especially familiar crimes such as matricide and patricide and violations of oath. Their worship was particularly strong in Athens, where they were integrated into state codes of law and justice following their appeasement in the Oresteia. In iconography, they were often portrayed as winged women with snakes for hair, holding torches, whips, or cups of poison, and clothed in dark, fearsome attire. They were chthonic, underworld beings, and their sacred sites often involved caves or earth altars. Their most well-known myth appears in Aeschylus' Oresteia trilogy, particularly the Eumenides. In it, Orestes kills his mother, Clytemnestra, to avenge the murder of his father, Agamemnon. You just have to read it for now. I'm so tired. The Erinyes pursue him relentlessly, defining matricide as an unpardonable crime. They are ultimately transformed by Athena into protective spirits of justice within Athens' new legal system. This myth dramatizes transition from vengeance to institutional law, often interpreted as a shift from matriarchal blood justice to patriarchal rational justice. Fuck patriarchal rational justice. Let's just have matriarchal blood justice! With the Erinyes embodying the former. They are also involved in various literary works as agents of divine retribution, the moral weight of female suffering and rage, unresolved injustice, and ancestral curses. The Erinyes represent a powerful feminist archetype of righteous female anger and the demand for accountability, particularly for harm done within intimate or familial structures. They symbolize the uncontainable rage of the violated silence, non-forgiving memory. Their pursuit is relentless until justice is served, and the power of older women, often described as ancient queen-like figures, to uphold moral law. Feminist scholars such as Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde have invoked the concept of female anger as a transformative and political force. The Erinyes in the slide are more than avengers. They are guardians of boundary, memory, and reckoning. In modern feminist retellings and literature, the Erinyes are often seen as symbols of women's collective trauma and rage. While they appear in novels like Christa's Wolf, Cassandra, and poetry by Carol Ann Duffy, embodying the retributive justice and haunting historical silence, in pop culture, they appear in Percy Jackson novels, video games like God of War, and feminist adaptations of Greek myths such as Lore Olympus and The Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes. While not directly invoked in discussions of race or colonialism in antiquity, modern interpretations can frame the Erinyes as representing the intergenerational rage of oppressed peoples. Justice beyond state structure, and especially in contexts where institutional systems fail victims, for example, survivors of sexual violence, colonized populations, they resonate with transforming justice practices in feminist and abolitionist discourse, where healing and accountability operate outside carceral logic. The Oresteia frames the transformative into the kindly ones as a necessary timing of feminine vengeance in favor of state law, a move that can lead to patriarchal assimilation. Some scholars caution against over-romanticizing revenge. Not me, pointing out the need to balance rage with transformation. Okay, that yeah. Nonetheless, their unrelenting pursuit of justice speaks to the power of remembrance, ancestral reckoning, and the collective outrage, crucial elements of feminist activism. The Erinyes invite us to honor female rage as sacred and necessary, understanding that justice isn't always polite and institutional, and reclaimed anger not as hysteria or vengeance, but as a force of moral clarity and communal truth. They are reminders that when the world forgets what it owes the wounded, the Furies will not. And now let's move on to Nemesis, also a figure of justice. Nemesis is an ancient Greek goddess associated with divine retribution, balance, and the punishment of hubris, excessive pride or arrogance before the gods. Her name derives from the Greek word nemein, meaning to give what is due. She first appears in Hesiod's Theogony, although her origins may precede the textual source and trace back to older Indo-European concepts of cosmic justice. Nemesis was not originally vengeful in personal stance, but a guardian of proportion and justice, ensuring that moral, social, and cosmic balance was maintained. Her function often paralleled the Morai, Fates, and Daiki. Did I just say a slur that I can reclaim? Nah, Psyche is justice, indicating a deep embedded cultural root in the enforcement of divine and ethical order. Nemesis was widely worshipped in the Rhamnos, a deme in northeast Attica, where she had a major sanctuary and was often referred to as Nemesis Rhamnosia. She was portrayed as a solemn figure, often linked holding a sword or scales, symbols of justice, a bridle or measuring rod, not God, signifying control and proportion, and sometimes accompanied by a wheel representing fate or fortune. Her worship suggests a fearsome reverence to the principle that no one escapes accountability. Nemesis does not have a central lineal myth like Artemis or Athena, which plays crucial roles in several traditions. In Hyginas Fabulae, she transforms into various animals to escape Zeus's pursuit until he catches her in the form of a swan, leading to the birth of Helen of Troy in some versions, making Nemesis an origin figure of mythological war triggered by beauty and injustice. In Greek tragedy and philosophical texts, Nemesis appears as the counter to hubris, punishing humans who act beyond their rightful place, especially powerful men who believe themselves above divine law. Nemesis is described with titles with titles such as Adraste, the inescapable one, Rhamnusia, her place of worship, and the avenger of crime. She is not a goddess of personal vengeance, but of cosmic fairness, a force ensuring that no one accrues unearned privilege or glory. Her emphasis on equity rather than punishment makes her a compelling symbol for feminist critique of systems that reward hubris, domination, and entitlement, often gendered male in historical context. Nemesis represents a counterforce to unchecked power, making her especially relevant in feminist frameworks that critique patriarchal hubris, colonial arrogance, and economic domination. As a guardian of limits, she offers a vision of divine justice not based on revenge, but as restoring moral order. Themes include holding the powerful accountable, justice for the overlooked and oppressed, and warning against imbalance, including in gender hierarchies. Nemesis' power is not tied to domesticity or eroticism, but to righteous cosmic correction, placing her in a long tradition of feminine figures wielding judicial or moral authority alongside with the Erinyes or Dike. In modern literature, Nemesis appears as a symbol of karma or cosmic components, seen as political satire, feminist poetry, and speculative fiction. She has also inspired characters in comics and video games, often as a cold but just female avenger and force of fate. Feminist spiritualities increasingly recognize Nemesis as a goddess of ethical resistance, especially in rituals or meditations focused on justice and balance. While not directly associated with race or class in ancient mythology, her role as a defender against excess can be reframed in modern feminist and decolonial discourses. She represents a force of restraint against exploitative systems, the embodiment and consequences for unchecked privilege, a symbol of call for ethical retribution of power across gender, racial, and economic lines. Some interpretations may mischaracterize Nemesis as a god of personal revenge or penance, but that is just a reflection of discomfort within feminine moral authority. Others may challenge the retributive tone of her myth in light of restorative justice models. If within feminist thought, Nemesis can be reimagined not as punitive, but as the voice that says enough. A force that reminds us that justice is not cruelty and that boundaries protect the sacred. Nemesis teaches that consequences matter, especially when systems fail the vulnerable, that women and other marginalized voices have the right to enforce boundaries against who transgress them, that hubris, whether personal or systemic, must always meet its equal and opposite force. She is a call to embrace the courageous work of justice even when it disrupts control or power. And so, lastly, we have a bonus section. They're not goddesses, yet absolutely worth mentioning figures. Let's start with Medusa. Medusa is one of the three Gorgons in Greek mythology, originally immortal and later transformed into a monster with snakes for hair and a petrifying gaze. Early accounts like Hesiod's Theogony mention her briefly, but her most enduring myth comes from Ovid's Metamorphoses, where Medusa is raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple and subsequently punished by Athena with the monstrous features. Medusa has become a powerful feminist symbol of the tragically common incidents of victim blaming and mythic misogyny that we must fight with pure resistance, the transformation of violent and innocence into feared power, and the gaze as a contested side of power. Once objectified, she becomes the one who turns men into stone, and not their cocks to stone. Medusa has become a powerful feminist symbol of the tragically common incidents of victim blaming and mythic misogyny that we must fight with. Did I just read this? Medusa has been interpreted by feminist writers and artists as a symbol of rage, survivorship, and defiance. Scholar Helene Sixus, just read it, called for laughing with Medusa in her 1975 essay encouraging women to reclaim their voices and monstrosity as power. Can I get a moment to mention my song, Medusa's Story? That, yeah. Could I get a moment to mention my song Medusa's story? If you're interested in my own personal interpretation, as we are coming to an end, we can be less mature here. So I can just give song recommendations, okay? Since Medusa's story is actually a song very popular among my fans, and people love it. Okay. But now, Medea. Medea is a Colchian princess, or at least was one. Priestess of Hecate and a powerful sorceress who betrays her homeland to aid Jason and his quest for the Golden Fleece. Her story is immortalized in Euripides' Medea, where she kills her children after Jason abandons her, making her one of the most controversial women in mythology. Medea's narrative is deeply entangled with themes of betrayal, abandonment, and patriarchal marriage, exile, otherness, and racialized foreignness, and feminine agency, rage, and maternal transgression. She is both vilified and celebrated as a symbol for extreme female resistance who refuses to remain discarded women in silence. Feminist thinkers like Julia Kristeva and Angela Carter have explored Medea as a figure of abjection, outsiderhood, and subversive autonomy. In post-colonial feminist readings, Medea also represents a racialized woman, demonized, yet powerful. And Circe is the daughter of the sun god Helios and a potent enchantress known from Homer's Odyssey. When Odysseus and his men arrive on her island, I don't know how to pronounce that. She transforms the men into swine, later reversing the spell and hosting Odysseus for a year. Circe embodies autonomous feminine power inside a patriarchal society, the feared woman alone who lives in her own terms, mastering magic and rejecting domination, and the reclaiming of witchcraft and transformative power. Her association with transformation, particularly of men into animals, is portrayed as an allegory for female control over male aggression or the wilderness of desire. The 2018 novel Circe by Madeline Miller reimagines her story as a journey of self-hate, trauma, healing, and magical womanhood. Circe is embraced in feminist spirituality as an archetype of the witch, as healer, boundary-keeping, and teacher. Though not divine, Medusa, Medea, and Circe are archetypal figures that expose the tensions between patriarchal fear and female power. Their narratives confront themes of violence and transformation, otherness and resistance, of sexual, maternal, magical agency. Their stories offer fertile ground for feminism reinterpretation, intersectional critiques, and spiritual reclamation. They are mythic voices for the unheard, the unruly, and the unforgiven. And the conclusion to the Greco-Roman figures. Yeah, this exploration of Greco-Roman goddesses and mythic women has revealed the immense symbolic and political power of those figures continue to hold in contemporary feminist thought. Far from being passive archetypes or ornamental deities, these goddesses, Artemis, Athena, Aphrodite, Hera, Demeter, Hecate, Nyx, Gaia, and others, embody complex, often contradictory dimensions of female power, autonomy, rage, eroticism, wisdom, and resistance. Alongside figures like Medusa, Medea, and Circe, they offer alternate visions of femininity that directly challenge the submissive senses and domesticated roles historically prescribed to women under patriarchal rule. From the virgin huntress who answers no man, to the goddess of strategic warfare who outfits patriarchy from within, to the monstrous women finished for being beautiful and being autonomous, these figures confront the enduring tension between women's liberation and society's fear of feminine sovereignty. Analyzing them through a radical feminist framework allows us to uncover, deconstruct, and reclaim suppressed mythologies that once centered on women's spiritual, sexual, and social agency. This is not merely academic excerpt. This is not merely an academic exercise, it is a political and spiritual project. Myth shapes reality. The goddesses we worship or ignore reflect the systems we live under. To revive these stories is to challenge these systems at their root. And you know what radical feminism comes from? Radical comes from the word root. So root feminism. And while this installment has focused on Greco-Roman mythology, the series is only beginning. Future videos will expand into other pantheons: Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Baltic, Nordic, Celtic, Hindu, Slavic, African, diasporic, indigenous, and more, continuing the work of recentering divine feminine across cultures. Each tradition offers its own suppressed and reinterpreted feminine figures, deities, and mythic women who speak to themes of decolonization, racial and sexual liberation, ecological consciousness, and collective memory. Together, these narratives invite us to reclaim power, reimagine identity, and reawaken the divine feminine in ourselves and the world. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, night, morning, whenever you're watching, and stay tuned for the next series. She's dripping again. Stay tuned for the next part of this series. Okay, bye. I love you. This was Elias of Venus, and stay tuned. Okay, stay tuned.